Welcome to Sleep with Myth. Close your eyes and let the world fade away. Tonight we drift beyond time, where gods dream and stories remember their light. In the beginning, before clocks and calendars, before mortals learned to measure their own fading, there was only the breath of eternity, slow, patient, endless. From that stillness came two brothers, Chronos, the keeper of all motion, and Thanatos, the keeper of all rest. Together they shaped the rhythm of existence, one counting the moments, the other granting them peace. Chronos built his throne in the sky, weaving golden threads that circled the heavens. His hands turned constellations, his voice commanded the seasons. Every grain of sand, every heartbeat, every sunrise moved to his pulse. He was the architect of continuation, the god who kept things moving, even when they wished to stay. Yet in all his brilliance, there was a shadow that followed him, the quiet steps of his brother Thanatos. Where Chronos marked beginnings, Thanatos marked endings. He did not come with cruelty, nor with joy. He came with understanding. His touch was gentle, his silence deep, and where he walked even gods lowered their voices. For ages they worked in harmony, one giving the gift of time, the other returning it to stillness. The world thrived between their twin domains, neither endless nor empty. But harmony, like the ticking of a clock, cannot remain unchanged. It must one day skip a beat. It began when Chronos noticed something strange in the stars. A pattern misaligned, a pulse delayed. The river of time stuttered, hesitating in its eternal flow. Mortals felt it first, sudden déjà vu, lingering echoes, the sense of living a moment twice. Clocks faltered, dreams repeated. Somewhere the balance had shifted. Chronos descended from his throne, golden light trailing behind him like a comet's breath. He followed the distortion through the folds of reality, down where seconds are born and centuries sleep. The path led him to a place he had not visited since creation, the valley between his realm and his brothers. There, beneath a sky that did not move, he found Thanatos waiting. "Brother," said Chronos, his voice like thunder slowed to a whisper. "The rhythm falters, the hours stumble. What have you done?" Thanatos looked up, his eyes calm and endless. "Nothing," he said. "The fault is not in death, but in delay. Something has begun to refuse me." Chronos frowned. "Refuse you? Who could refuse the inevitable?" Thanatos turned his gaze toward the mortal world. "Those who fear to rest," he murmured. "They cling too tightly to what you give them, stretching your thread beyond what it can bear. They have learned to fight both of us." The god of time felt a tremor in his golden veins. "They defy the order? They defy rhythm," Thanatos replied. "They dream of eternity without peace. They have forgotten that rest is part of motion." The words unsettled Chronos. For though he ruled time, he had always admired persistence, the flame that refuses to fade. "Perhaps they honor us through their defiance," he said softly. "Or perhaps," said Thanatos, "they destroy us through it." The two brothers stood in silence as the stars above them froze for a heartbeat. Time itself held its breath. The balance between movement and stillness, between becoming and release, trembled like a clock about to break. Chronos turned toward his brother. Then we must remind them. Thanatos's voice was as soft as falling dust. Remind them of what? That to live is to pass, said the god of time. And to pass is to be remembered. The wind stilled. The sky flickered. Far above, the constellations began to dim, one by one, as if listening. In that silence, a new journey began, not through time, but through the heart of what it means to be bound by it. Sleep, listener. In the next part, the brothers will walk among mortals, to teach them what it means to move and what it means to rest. The night after their meeting, Chronos and Thanatos descended together into the mortal realm. The air there trembled with an unfamiliar weight, seconds moving slower than they should, hours stretching thin like tired threads. The river of time that once wound effortlessly through the world now pulsed unevenly, breaking its rhythm like a heart losing its beat. Mortals slept restlessly. Some awoke too early, some not at all. Children cried out from dreams that felt too long, while old men sat in silence, feeling the day refused to end. Time had begun to hesitate. Death had begun to doubt. Chronos walked beside his brother, their forms unseen by mortal eyes. His robe shimmered like starlight caught in motion, while Thanatos wore stillness like a second skin. As they passed through cities and fields, they watched the mortals struggling against both of them, the living trying to hold what could not be held, the dying trying to stay where they could not belong. "They no longer trust us," said Thanatos quietly. "They think the wheel of life has teeth." Chronos's eyes were heavy with light. "They have tasted invention," he replied. "They have learned to slow the sun, to cage the seasons, to number their days as if ownership could protect them." Thanatos looked to the horizon where dawn refused to rise. "And yet, for all their clocks, they have forgotten how to rest." The god of time lifted his hand. The air shimmered, and before them appeared the great river. The true river of time, invisible to mortals, flowing through every heartbeat, every sunrise, every forgotten breath. Once it had been clear and endless. Now it hung still, its current tangled by mortal will. Shards of memory floated within it like broken glass. Chronos knelt at its edge, his reflection bending in the sluggish water. "They have trapped their moments," he said. "They hoard what should pass." He reached into the current, and the water recoiled. It had learned to fear him. Thanatos stood behind him, his shadow falling across the river. They cling to the illusion that time can be tamed. But in doing so, they have stopped it. The god of rest reached down, and where his fingers touched, the water darkened, not in corruption, but in calm. The ripples steadied, the flow softened. Chronos watched as the current slowly began to move again. It obeyed not command, but compassion. "You bring release," said Chronos. "I bring completion," said Thanatos. "Without it, your motion has no meaning." For a moment, the brothers stood together in silence, the faint sound of the river beginning to hum again between them. But the peace did not last. From far downstream came a deep groaning sound, the cry of something vast and ancient breaking apart. They followed it through the mists until they came to the edge of a city frozen mid-breath. Towers hung in midair, clouds stood unmoving, and people were locked in gestures. Laughter suspended, Tears paused halfway down a cheek. Chronos touched one of the frozen mortals and felt the faintest heartbeat, stretched impossibly thin. "This," said Thanatos, "is where they refused me most." In the center of the city stood a great monument, a tower of crystal gears and mirrored faces, built by mortals to outlast death itself. Inside it glowed a heart of captured sunlight, pulsing but not beating. Chronos stepped closer. Each turn of the gears was slower than the last. "They have built their own eternity," he murmured. "But it cannot move." "Eternity does not move," said Thanatos. "It waits." Chronos placed his hand upon the glass. "Then perhaps we must remind them what waiting costs." He drew from his robe a single golden thread, one of the strands that wove the fabric of time itself. Wrapping it around his fingers, he let it touch the gears. At once, the light within the tower flared. The gears began to move, but not smoothly. They spun in reverse, the clock unwinding its false forever. The city groaned as motion returned. People gasped, cried, aged, and wept all in the same breath. Time rushed back through them like a storm reclaiming its path. When it was done, the tower had vanished. Only a pool of silver dust remained where it had stood. Chronos turned to his brother. "Will they understand?" Thanatos watched the mortals below, some kneeling, some looking to the sky in awe. "They will not understand," he said softly, "but they will remember." As dawn finally rose, the two gods stood at the edge of the living world. The light that spread across the horizon was thin and new, hesitant, fragile, and beautiful. Chronos felt its warmth and smiled faintly. "The river moves again." Thanatos nodded. "But there is still fear in its depths. They have touched forever, and forever is hard to forget." Chronos looked down at the mortals stirring from their frozen moments. "Then we must teach them to release." The god of rest turned to him. "And how will you teach them something you struggle with yourself?" Chronos said nothing. The wind passed through them, carrying the faint sound of the river's renewed flow, patient, imperfect, alive. "Sleep, listener." In the next part, the brothers will meet the one mortal who dares to defy both, the child who believes she can stop time itself. In a small village by the sea, where waves met the shore in the slow cadence of breath, there lived a child named Alara. She was no goddess, no chosen oracle, no heir to fate, just a mortal girl born with a strange gift. She could hear time. Not see it, not count it, hear it. To her, every heartbeat, every gust of wind, every falling leaf was part of a grand melody. She would sit for hours listening to the world's hidden song, tracing the rhythm only she could perceive. The villagers found her odd but harmless, a dreamer in a realm that had forgotten dreams. But one day the melody changed. The morning began as always, the waves humming softly, the gulls calling above. Yet beneath it all, Alara heard something falter. A pause where there should have been motion, a skipped note in the world's song, frightened her. She ran to the square where the old clock tower stood, its gears ancient but faithful. The clock's pendulum swayed slowly, then slower, until it stopped. The moment it did, everything around her froze. The waves halted mid-crest, birds hung motionless in the sky, and even her own breath waited between heartbeats. Alara stood in silence that was absolute. Not death, but suspension. Time had stopped listening. In the stillness, a voice reached her. Not human, not divine, but something between. You have touched what even gods fear, it whispered. Why have you stilled the song? I didn't mean to, she said softly. It stopped on its own. The air shimmered, and before her appeared two figures, one radiant, woven of golden light, the other cloaked in twilight stillness. Chronos and Thanatos. The child fell to her knees, trembling. Are you the voices I hear in my dreams? Chronos knelt before her, his expression solemn. Perhaps you have done what no mortal should. You have found the silence between the beats. Thanatos studied her quietly. She did not find it. It found her. Chronos frowned. How can a mortal stop the river? Because she listens, said Thanatos. And listening is power. Alara looked between them, tears glimmering in her eyes. The world sounded wrong, she said. I wanted to fix it. Chronos rose, his golden aura dimming. You cannot fix time, child. You can only move within it. But what if it hurts? She asked. What if time keeps taking and never gives back? Thanatos stepped closer, his shadow cool against the air. Then you rest. That is what I offer. The girl shook her head. But resting isn't living. Chronos and Thanatos exchanged a glance, light and shadow mirroring each other. For all their eons, neither had heard words so simple, so true. She carries the ache of the mortals, said Thanatos. They wish to keep what must pass. She has become their echo. Chronos closed his eyes. Then she must learn to release what she holds. He lifted his hand, and the world trembled. The frozen waves began to glisten, the light of suspended dawn shimmering like glass. Alara, he said softly, what do you hear now? She listened. Beneath the quiet, she heard the faintest ticking, slow, distant, but alive. It was the sound of the great river stirring again. It's moving, she whispered, but it's sad. Chronos smiled faintly. That sadness is its beauty. The song of time is always a requiem. The child looked at him, tears falling freely. Will it ever stop? Thanatos answered, his voice a hush of dusk. One day, but not today. Chronos lowered his hand, and the air rippled. The waves crashed to shore, the birds resumed flight, and the world exhaled. Time began to move again, but differently, softer, slower, carrying the trace of her touch. When it was done, Alara stood trembling, staring at her hands. I heard it breathe, she said. You always will, said Chronos, but do not try to hold it. And if I do? She asked. Thanatos smiled gently. Then you will meet me. They turned to leave, but before they vanished, the child called out, Will I see you again? Chronos looked back, his voice distant as wind through stars. You already do. The gods disappeared, and Alara stood alone beneath the clock tower. Its pendulum swung once more, each movement echoing through her chest like a heartbeat that belonged to everything. She placed her hand on its side, whispering, I won't forget your song. From that day, The clock never stopped again. But sometimes, when the world grew too loud, she could still hear the silence between its beats. Sleep, listener. In the next part, the girl who heard time will grow older, and the gods will return to find that even they cannot stop what she becomes. Years passed in the mortal world like breaths in the wind. Alara grew, but she did not age as others did. Time circled her softly, uncertain whether to claim her. The gods had touched her once, and something of their rhythm lingered within her veins. She became a keeper of clocks, tending the old tower that had once frozen the world. Yet even as she grew older, her eyes remained those of a child listening to an invisible song. Each night, she would climb to the top of the tower and look out across the world. She saw seasons change, empires rise and fall, lovers meet and part, all within the rhythm she had once stopped. But sometimes, when the moon was high and the sea still, she would hear another sound beneath the ticking. A pulse not of earth, but of heaven. It was the heartbeat of the hourglass. Far above, beyond the constellations, in the place where time is born, there existed an hourglass as vast as the firmament. Its sand was made of stars, its glass carved from eternity's breath. It did not measure days or centuries. It measured meaning. And lately its sand had begun to dream. Chronos sat before it, his golden hands motionless for the first time in eternity. Within the hourglass, galaxies shimmered like dust, but their flow was faltering again. Each grain that should have fallen hung suspended, trembling in indecision. "Brother," he whispered, "it happens once more." From the shadows beside him, Thanatos emerged, his form soft as nightfall. "The mortal girl?" Chronos nodded. "Her rhythm is spreading. Mortals have begun to hear her silence. They no longer run from their endings. They listen for them." Thanatos regarded the hourglass, eyes reflecting the starlight drifting within it. "Then the world begins to remember. Or forget," said Chronos. "If they stop fearing me, what purpose remains?" The god of rest placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Your purpose is not to be feared. It is to be followed. The sun does not doubt its rise because mortals no longer worship the dawn." Chronos sighed, a sound like centuries folding. "I envy you, Thanatos. You are peace. I am burden. And yet, even peace must wait for you." The two gods stood before the hourglass, its light dimming, its stars swirling in uneven orbits. Then, from within its depths, they heard a whisper, soft as sand, clear as a child's breath. "Please," it said, "let me fall." Chronos stepped forward. "It speaks." "The sand dreams," said Thanatos. "It remembers movement." He raised his hand, and from his palm fell a shadow, a fragment of stillness so pure it glowed. He placed it at the base of the hourglass, where the starlight gathered. "If stillness and motion must coexist," he murmured, "then let them do so here." The stars within the glass began to move again, not as before, but differently, each grain descending in spirals of gold and violet. As they fell, new constellations formed, ones even Chronos did not recognize. Shapes of rivers, eyes, and hearts. The hourglass had begun to create its own rhythm. Thanatos smiled faintly. It learns from her. Chronos frowned. From the mortal? She carries the song we forgot. The god of time gazed into the hourglass. He saw not galaxies now, but visions, Elara at her tower, touching the pendulum of the great clock. Mortals pausing to listen to the rain. Lovers holding each other without fear of parting. He saw the world breathing to a gentler beat. She teaches us what we are, said Thanatos. Not keepers of endings, but witnesses of turning. Chronos closed his eyes. Then perhaps it is time to listen again. The two gods bowed their heads before the dreaming hourglass. Around them, the cosmos brightened, as if the universe itself were inhaling after a long sleep. The stars moved again, no longer bound to perfection, but to peace. The gods are listening, she whispered, and somewhere beyond the sky the gods did not deny it. Sleep, listener. In the next part, the hourglass will shatter, and from its pieces, even the gods will learn the meaning of loss. The gods do not weep, but the heavens sometimes remember how. For 1,000 heartbeats, peace had lived between motion and rest. The river of time flowed again. The hourglass above whispered with dreaming stars, and the mortal world breathed to a gentler rhythm. But stillness cannot last forever, not even when born of balance. Eternity, by its nature, must move. It began with a sound, a thin, distant crack, like glass breaking behind the horizon. Chronos heard it first. He turned his gaze toward the edge of his realm and saw the faintest fracture running through the fabric of sky. Light leaked from it, slow and trembling, golden as sunrise and dark as dusk. It was not a wound of chaos. It was something deeper, a memory breaking free. Thanatos appeared beside him. It begins. Chronos frowned. What does? The hourglass dreams too much. Below them, in the mortal world, Elara felt it too. The clock tower trembled beneath her fingertips. The pendulums swing uneven. When she looked toward the heavens, she saw what no mortal had ever seen. A hairline fracture slicing across the night, stars spilling through like sand through a broken vessel. It was beautiful and terrifying. She whispered, "The sky is bleeding time." Back above the cosmos, Chronos reached toward the fracture, but his fingers passed through light and shadow alike. "It will not close," he murmured. "The dream refuses to end." "The hourglass has learned mortality," said Thanatos. "It feels, and feeling demands release." They turned toward the great hourglass suspended in the void. Its stars were no longer spiraling in harmony. Some moved too fast, others froze mid-descent. The sands of eternity had begun to remember, each grain holding stories, faces, loves, losses. Time itself had become self-aware. Chronos stepped closer, voice trembling. "This cannot be undone." "Nothing ever is," said Thanatos. A pulse thundered through the cosmos. The hourglass convulsed. Cracks webbed through its surface, spilling light like tears. From within came a sound not of breaking, but of awakening. A vast exhalation that made the constellations dim. Elara clutched her chest as her heartbeat aligned with it. She heard the whisper again, the same voice that once spoke when time had stopped. Why must everything fall? She looked to the heavens. Because falling is how we learn to land. The glass shattered. Light burst through creation, not fire, not destruction, but memory released. The sands of the hourglass poured outward, scattering across all worlds. Some became stars. Some became souls. Some became seconds reborn. The sky rippled with rivers of light, each carrying echoes of what had ever been. Chronos fell to his knees. It's undone. The order. Thanatos knelt beside him. No, it's become. The god of time watched as fragments of the hourglass drifted through the void, glowing like dying suns. In their reflection he saw every mortal life, fleeting, precious, unfinished. And for the first time he felt envy not for their freedom, but for their fragility. They end, he whispered, and yet they shine. Thanatos smiled faintly. Endings are what make light visible. Below, Elera's tower shook as the final pulse reached the earth. The clock face cracked, its hands spinning wildly, and then silence. The world paused, but not in fear. Thanatos turned to him. No, brother, it is shared. The god of time looked into the endless expanse, and for the first time since creation he smiled. Then perhaps this is what the gods were meant to do. To listen. Thanatos nodded. And to let go. Far below, Elera stood in the ruins of the clock tower, the pendulum still and quiet. Around her, the world glowed with soft starlight. She whispered into the air, "Thank you," and the wind answered, "You're welcome. Sleep, listener." In the final part, the broken sky will settle, and the gods will learn the last truth, that even eternity must one day rest. The sky was no longer broken, it was open. Where once there had been order, there was now wonder. The shattered hourglass had not destroyed creation. It had freed it. The sands of time had scattered across existence, and each grain carried memory, compassion, and meaning. The gods walked among their own fragments, humbled by what they saw. Chronos stood upon the horizon where night met dawn. His golden robes were dimmed, his hands dusted with the starlight that had once obeyed him. The weight of endlessness had left him lighter. Beside him, Thanatos watched the quiet world below, a world that now moved not because it was commanded to, but because it chose to. "It breathes without us," said Chronos. "It always did," said Thanatos. "We simply forgot to listen." They stood together in the hush before morning. Below them, mortals awoke to the soft new light, their lives shorter than ever, yet fuller. They no longer feared endings. They cherished them. Each heartbeat was a treasure. Each silence was a prayer. The clock tower in Elera's village stood rebuilt, but the pendulum no longer ruled the hours, it sang them. Elera herself sat beside the sea, gray in her hair, gold in her gaze. The tide rose and fell in rhythm with her breathing. She had grown old, but not weary. The gods had visited her in dreams, not as rulers, but as companions. She had taught them what it meant to end. Now, she sat with her hands in the water, feeling the waves slip through her fingers. "I can hear it again," she whispered. "The song." From the air beside her came a familiar stillness, soft as twilight. Thanatos appeared, his cloak trailing over the sand. "You always could." She smiled faintly. "Will you stay?" "For a little while." A golden shimmer joined them. Chronos stepped from the edge of the sea, the light of dawn curling around him. "The river returns to the ocean," he said quietly, "and the current is calm." Alara looked between them. "You sound tired." "I am," said Chronos. "For the first time, I can feel the weight of what I carried." "That weight was love," said Thanatos. "You just never called it that." Chronos smiled, his expression soft. "Perhaps you are right, brother." The three sat together as the sun climbed, god of time, god of rest, and mortal child of both. Around them, the world shimmered with the remnants of falling stars. Each glint in the tide was a second reborn, each whisper of wind a memory forgiven. The song of the world was whole again, not perfect, but complete. Alara closed her eyes. "Will I see you again when the last moment comes?" Thanatos touched her hand gently. "I will be there." Chronos placed his palm over theirs. "And so will I." The air around them grew warmer, brighter. The waves stilled. A final moment unfolded. One heartbeat stretched into eternity. In that single breath, Alara saw everything. Her childhood laughter, the frozen sky, the gods beside her, the faces of all who had ever lived. Time did not end. Aside, when it passed, the sea shimmered gold. Alara's body became light, dissolving into the tide. The water carried her into the horizon where the sun met the dark, where both brothers waited, silent and proud. Together, they watched as her light joined the sky. From her essence, a single sound echoed across existence, the last tick of eternity. And then peace. Chronos turned to his brother. "Is this how it ends?" Thanatos smiled. "Nothing ends. It only rests." The god of time looked upward. The constellations had rearranged once more. In their patterns he saw her, the girl who stopped the clock, her outline drawn in starlight, one hand outstretched as if gently holding the world's pulse. Chronos lowered his head. "Then let it rest." The river slowed. The stars dimmed. The universe exhaled. For the first time since the birth of everything, silence reigned. Not the silence of absence, but of arrival. And in that stillness, a soft voice, perhaps mortal, perhaps divine, whispered through the fading light. "All that begins must learn to end. All that ends must learn to begin." The two brothers stood side by side, guardians no longer, only witnesses to a world that had finally remembered itself. The sun rose again. Thank you for listening to Sleep with Myth.